This time, we're talking about the real reason why people who grew up with their self-esteem crushed keep changing jobs. Let's get into it. For those who spent their childhood having their feelings constantly dismissed, emotions that never fade remain even into adulthood. Why are relationships so painful for me? Why does one person's attitude throw my whole inner world into chaos? If you've ever felt that way, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with your character. It may simply mean that the wounds you received in childhood are still moving inside you, even now. In this video, we'll take an honest and careful look at the true nature of people whose self-esteem was damaged, and how that affects their daily lives and work. People whose self-esteem has been crushed often find themselves wanting to be above others, slipping into overly logical behavior, or stubbornly refusing to back down. Hearing that, you might think, see, I really am a terrible person. But please, pause for just a moment. At the root of those feelings isn't a desire for superiority. It's a defensive response, a deep, quiet plea that says, I don't want to be hurt anymore. When someone has been repeatedly denied, looked down on, and never had their worth recognized as a child, the way they learn to protect themselves is often by trying to stay above others. Becoming overly logical works the same way. Knowing that acting on emotion leads to pain, they arm themselves with reasoning and try to keep their distance. Stubbornness, too, often comes from a fear of yielding. A feeling that says, if I give in, I lose, if I admit it, I fall apart. That fear is what holds the behavior in place. There are many people who manage to get by at home, even when they're moody or difficult. Family doesn't leave, and home tends to be an environment where emotional outbursts are, to some degree, tolerated. So moving through the day on feeling alone still works. But outside the home, that's not how it goes. At work, with strangers, situations that demand emotional control come one after another. When the habit of acting purely on feeling is deeply ingrained from life at home, trying to apply that same approach to the outside world simply doesn't work. Because relationships outside the home aren't built on the idea that expressing emotion solves things. As that reality accumulates, it turns into a fear of going out, a heaviness around connecting with others at all. Feeling intense anger or distress towards someone in a position of authority, a teacher, or anyone who carries that kind of attitude, is a reaction commonly seen in people who've had their self-esteem wounded. The anger rises because the other person's manner overlaps with someone from childhood who once denied them. On the surface, it might feel like simple dislike. But deeper in the body, an old wound is being touched. That's why work that requires constant deference feels impossible to accept. It isn't laziness. It isn't selfishness. It's closer to the body crying out, I don't want to receive that same wound again. Regardless of whether the person is aware of it, the moment they enter certain situations, blood pressure rises and the heartbeat becomes irregular without warning. This happens because the autonomic nervous system is responding to memories from the past. The mind may be saying, calm down, but the body has already entered a state of alert, and willpower alone can't hold it back. The anguish of wanting to change but being unable to isn't a sign of weak will. It's a pattern that has been written into the body itself, and it's that pattern that's running. Not wanting to be around people comes from the body having accumulated experience after experience of, this is what happens when I get close. And in that light, it's actually a very natural form of self-protection. Many people whose self-esteem has been damaged carry a powerful desire to be right. Not wanting to admit mistakes, not wanting to be criticized, not wanting to feel ashamed. Those emotions surface throughout their behavior. But the harder they push to be right, the more they overreact to others looking down on them, and the impression they end up leaving is one of someone emotional and overly argumentative. That's the moment they feel, my character really has been warped. And that self-judgment wounds their self-esteem further, creating a structure that's difficult to escape. Here, try shifting your perspective for a moment. The character that someone develops after having their self-esteem crushed in childhood is an adaptation, a way of surviving that environment. They put on armor so they wouldn't get hurt. They used logic to hide their feelings. They held their ground so they could hold themselves together. That was the best they could do with what they had at the time. Rather than punishing yourself with the word warped, when you look at it and think, I made it this far through all of that, something in the chest loosens just slightly. When you want to change your character, what you need first may not be self-rejection. It may simply be learning, without judgment, why you became who you are. In any workplace, there are often people in senior or managerial positions who feel less capable than you. Many people can write that off as just part of the job. But for someone who grew up with their self-esteem wounded, it isn't something that can simply be accepted and set aside. Being made to follow someone less capable, being forced into constant deference, that overlaps with the memory of being made to bow your head to unreasonable treatment as a child. The body reacts. The mind refuses. And before long, staying in that workplace hits its limit. That is one part of the structure behind why jobs keep changing. The feeling of, I changed jobs again, and the self-blame that comes with it, that's understandable. But staying by force in an environment that sends the heartbeat into chaos, when self-esteem is already deeply hurt, isn't necessarily the right answer. Changing jobs repeatedly isn't because willpower is lacking. It's because the body and mind keep arriving at the same conclusion, this place isn't safe. What matters is learning which environments allow you to actually function. Work where you don't have to be deferential to everyone, workplaces where hierarchy is relatively flat, environments where results are what get recognized. Choosing a job with those conditions in mind isn't indulging an inability to endure. It's a realistic strategy grounded in understanding your own nature. When anger rises or the heartbeat becomes irregular, trying to control those feelings in the moment is extremely difficult. Rather than that, quietly reflecting afterward, why did I react so strongly back there, tends to be more useful over time. Try putting words to the emotion underneath the reaction. I felt looked down on. There's that same pattern again. That person reminded me of someone from when I was young. As those realizations accumulate, the shape of your own patterns gradually becomes visible. Once the pattern is visible, moments begin to appear where you can take a small step back and simply observe, here it comes again. Self-esteem that was wounded in childhood can be rebuilt, even in adulthood. It doesn't mean making one sweeping transformation. It lives in small, daily accumulation. Saying what you actually think. Making small decisions for yourself. Deliberately creating moments where you can say, I did well. These things are quiet and unglamorous, but over time, they build the foundation that self-esteem rests on. There's no need to rush, and there's no need to do it perfectly. If you manage to say one fewer harsh thing to yourself today than yesterday, that is enough. The pain of living that people carry when their self-esteem was crushed is not a problem of character. It is not a failure of will. It is simply the result of doing everything possible to protect yourself in a past environment, and that result has become part of who you are.